Over the years, I've spent a lot of time observing people around money, not in any formal way, not like a study or a report, just quietly watching at dinners, at meetings, at small gatherings, and sometimes even in casual conversations when people think no one's paying attention. And there's one thing that keeps showing up almost without fail. People tie who they are to how much money they have, not consciously usually, not in a way they would admit if you asked. But if you watch closely, you can see it in their habits, in the way they talk, in the way they react when the numbers go up or down. Money slowly turns into a measure of value, of personal worth. And most people don't even realize it. It just happens over time, quietly, almost politely. And before they know it, money isn't just money anymore. It becomes a mirror. It becomes a judgment. It's interesting, too, because this doesn't usually start when someone has a lot of money. It often begins much earlier, when they're young or early in their career, or just starting to make enough to feel a little independent. They imagine that crossing a certain line will make them feel secure or successful, a particular salary, a particular lifestyle, a house or a car that looks the part. And when they get closer, there's relief, there's pride, sometimes even a quiet feeling of contentment. But that feeling fades, not because they're doing something wrong, not because money has failed. It fades because money was never what would satisfy the deeper need. That need was always about being okay with themselves, feeling like they mattered, feeling like they were enough. And money, for a while, can distract from that, can temporarily smooth over the unease, but it doesn't replace it. I've met people who earn more in a year than most people will see in a lifetime, and yet they wake up feeling uneasy, not about bills or expenses, but about themselves. You can sense it in the way they talk about decisions, in the way they hesitate when talking about risks, in the subtle tension when they discuss success. They're careful, sometimes overly so, because once money becomes a reflection of value, you start to defend it. Every loss or setback feels personal. Every comparison, whether obvious or subtle, chips away at confidence. And the funny thing is, people don't always notice it in themselves. They just feel the pressure. They feel the tension. They feel that they can't pause even when they want to. Comparison is the quiet enemy in this process, not the kind that shows up in headlines or advertisements, but the small, almost invisible kind. When you hear someone else has earned more or bought more or achieved something faster, you don't feel jealousy right away. It's smaller than that. You feel slightly less, slightly behind. And if your self-worth is tied to money, those moments start adding up. You begin questioning yourself in ways that never felt necessary before. You wonder why you're not further along, why someone younger seems to have accomplished more, why your progress, even if steady, doesn't feel like progress anymore. Money turns into a race that no one officially signed up for, but somehow everyone ends up running, and everyone keeps score, whether they like it or not. Financial success, of course, brings praise and recognition. People nod, they listen, they ask questions, they show respect, and it's easy to confuse that external validation with true self-worth, and it feels good. It's natural that it feels good, but over time, the praise becomes a quiet weight. Because if money is what makes you feel seen, then losing money feels like losing yourself. That's when people start making choices they wouldn't otherwise make. They stay in roles they don't enjoy. They accept deals that make them uncomfortable. They take risks they don't fully believe in, not because they want more, but because they're afraid of feeling like less. And that fear, subtle as it is, grows quietly. Losses show the link between money and identity more clearly than anything else. When money is simply money, a loss is disappointing, but it's contained. It's a setback. You recover, you adjust. But when money becomes proof of personal value, a loss becomes something more. It becomes a verdict. It feels like the world is saying you didn't measure up. And that's not just stressful, it's exhausting. People often hide it, not because the loss is huge, but because the blow lands where it wasn't supposed to, inside themselves. And over time, those quiet blows accumulate. They change the way people see themselves, the way they talk to themselves when no one else is listening. The calmest people around money are rarely the ones who talk about it the most. They don't need it to explain who they are. It's just there. Useful, sometimes helpful, sometimes inconvenient. But it's not a mirror. And because of that, they handle both success and failure with a steadier hand. They don't need applause. They don't need external signs to feel okay. Money hasn't been invited into their sense of self, so it can't control the mood or the measure of their day. Most people, though, let money become a scoreboard. Again, not officially. No one hands out a medal or a certificate, but the score keeps ticking. Higher income means winning. Lower income means falling behind. And the scoreboard doesn't turn off. Even when you're ahead, you're still watching, still adjusting, still comparing. Peace is postponed, first until you reach a number, then until you hold it, then until you beat it. And somewhere along the way, you forget what you thought peace would feel like. And that's where a lot of stress, a lot of quiet anxiety comes from. I've seen people reach milestones they once whispered about in private, only to feel strangely empty. They earned it, they achieved it, they climbed, and yet the feeling of satisfaction they expected never settles. So they raise the target, not because they necessarily want more, but because stopping would force them to confront the truth. That money was never the answer to the question they were really asking. It was always about feeling sufficient, feeling recognized, feeling steady inside. There's another layer that often goes unnoticed. When self-worth depends on income, self-respect can slowly erode. You start to justify choices that don't feel entirely right. You spend your time doing things you don't enjoy because the number looks correct. You ignore small discomforts because the appearance of success matters more than actual contentment. Over years, this adds up quietly, not in your bank account, but inside yourself. From the outside, you might look successful, but inside, there's a dull sense that you're compromising, that you're negating who you are for something that never truly belonged to money to begin with. And that subtle erosion is harder to see than a missed investment or a bad deal, but its effect is just as significant. I've noticed that when money is removed from the conversation, some people struggle to define themselves, not because they lack achievements, but because they've spent so long letting money define them that they don't know what's left. Without salaries, assets, or accolades, they feel exposed. And this isn't a moral failing, it's a pattern. It forms naturally because society rewards financial outcomes loudly and quietly ignores everything else. So people learn to let money speak for them. And after a while, they forget that it was never meant to. I've also learned that the real danger isn't wanting money. Wanting comfort, security, or stability is natural. The danger is letting money dictate your sense of value, your inner dialogue, your confidence when no one else is watching. Because that inner voice, the one that talks to you when you're alone, shapes how you treat others, how you make decisions, how you measure your day, and ultimately, how you measure your life. If that voice only feels confident when numbers are high, you've given money a seat at the head of the table it was never supposed to have. Some of the most successful people I've known, financially and otherwise, are careful about this boundary. They don't confuse outcomes with self-worth. They understand that results are influenced by timing, luck, and circumstances beyond their control. That understanding creates emotional distance, not indifference. It allows them to approach opportunities without desperation and setbacks without shame. And that's a quiet form of freedom that almost no one talks about. Freedom from letting numbers decide your mood. Freedom from letting external markers define your day. Freedom from the quiet, constant pressure of comparison. Money, as I've observed, amplifies what's already there. If you're uneasy with yourself, more money doesn't fix that. It magnifies it. It gives the unease bigger rooms, louder echoes, more elaborate distractions. And if you're grounded, money doesn't unsettle you. It simply gives you more options, more flexibility. The mistake is believing that money creates contentment, rather than revealing the state of your contentment. That belief keeps people chasing something they can't ever catch because it was never a thing to be caught. It was a feeling, a quiet measure of self that has nothing to do with money at all. I don't say this to criticize. I've felt these pulls myself. Anyone paying attention probably has. It's easy to drift into measuring yourself with numbers that are visible, simple, tangible, instead of qualities that are harder to see. But over time, it becomes clear that a good life is quieter than a good score. It's not as easy to display. It doesn't impress strangers, but it's steadier. It feels lighter when you wake up. It doesn't crumble when circumstances change. And that subtle stability, once understood, becomes one of the rarest and most valuable forms of wealth. When money stops being a mirror, it relaxes. It becomes what it was always meant to be, a tool, not a measure of identity. And when that shift happens even just a little, you notice unexpected things. You don't feel richer, you feel lighter, less defensive, less anxious. You can make mistakes without shame. You can enjoy success without needing applause. You can live with a sense of continuity rather than always measuring yourself against an invisible, unforgiving scoreboard. And that peace is rare, not because it's complicated, but because it requires self-awareness, patience, and courage to let go of a habit that was formed without consent. After decades of observing this, what stays with me isn't the money itself, not the wins or losses. It's the difference between people who use money and people who let money use them. One group sleeps more easily, laughs more freely, feels more present. The other group is always reaching even when they've already arrived. And the difference isn't intelligence, it's not effort. It's where they've placed their sense of value, whether they've allowed money to become the measure of who they are, or whether they've kept it in its proper place. And that over time quietly changes everything about how you experience life.